What if now, in adulthood, you're doing a bunch of things that you don't actually want to do? What if you were raised in survival in childhood, and survival in childhood taught you how to survive? It taught you that you needed to play a specific role in childhood because that was the only way that you would receive love, validation, approval, acceptance. That was the only way that you were taught that you existed, was by playing a specific role as a child. Survival, again, is fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Imagine you were the scapegoat. Imagine everything was your fault and you just learned that everything was inherently your fault. Imagine you learned a dynamic of fawning, appeasing, people pleasing. Imagine you learned to just please people because you learned that in order to exist, what you had to do in order to survive was to please people. So you learned that it was your responsibility to please people. Isn't it wild how survival in childhood can teach us, train us, condition us into a specific role that has us doing a bunch of things in adulthood that we don't actually want to do? What if you were raised in a survival-based childhood with fight, flight, freeze, fawn? You were not accepted for who you were. You had to be somebody very specific in order to receive the love, validation, approval, and acceptance. You were not taught to validate and approve of yourself. No, 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 no. Other people had to do that for you. And what if that's what happened for you, you never healed that, and instead you just brought that same dynamic into adulthood? Isn't it wild? Isn't it wild that there are adults that were raised in survival in childhood, never healed the dynamic, and to this day are still doing a bunch of things that they don't want to? I'm going to zoom in here on something that I think is very important to understand and just altogether make this make sense. There's a word that I use here, survival. The reason why I use that word is because it's literally survival in childhood. But survival is all about the identity. The identity needs to survive. So in order to survive, because it's not being raised in a healthy childhood, it's not being raised with healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation, it's not being accepted for who it is. It is learning, oh, as I am not okay. As I am defective. So therefore, I need to become something or somebody else. That is what the survival-based identity learns. Not only that, but mirroring in and of itself, the act of a parent mirroring and containing their child is what leads to healthy development from childhood to adolescence and into adulthood. When that is not existent in childhood, essentially what ends up happening to the child is that they learn that they don't exist. Not only that do they learn that they don't exist, but they learn that, oh, I am only existent through this role. I have to do this, I have to do that, these things that I don't want to do to survive, but also to be seen, also to exist. A child that does not get healthy mirroring, that does not get mirroring altogether. Imagine a parent going to a child and acknowledging the child's existence, acknowledging that whatever they're feeling is what they're feeling and it's okay to feel what they're feeling, to actually guide them through the process of containing their emotions and then teaching them how to do that themselves. In survival-based childhoods, these dynamics are not present. In survival-based childhoods, identities learn to do specific things that they probably don't want to do in order to survive. As I am not good enough. As I am defective. As I am not acceptable. I am not accepted. So therefore, I need to do a bunch of things that I don't want to do in order to exist, in order to be seen, in order to be acknowledged, in order to survive. Yes, healthy childhoods are drastically different from unhealthy survival-based childhoods. And again, I'll say it, there's no such thing as a perfect childhood. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. There's no such thing as a child that comes out of, or I should say an adult that comes out of childhood with some level of marring and scathing. It just doesn't exist. But what I'm doing here, what I'm exploring, is the reality that many people are in adulthood doing a bunch of things that they don't want to do because they're carrying their survival-based childhood dynamics from childhood into adulthood. And what they learned, as I've said before, is that the only way that they are seen, the only way that they're acknowledged, the only way that they feel like they survive is if they take on a role that is very specific to survival in childhood. Maybe it was people pleasing. Maybe it was, I don't know, doing things that were not back then age appropriate. It doesn't matter what it was. What matters was that that contributed to the dynamic of the survival inside of them. If the identity is to survive, it has to do a bunch of things that it doesn't want to do because it wasn't raised with healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation. And there with that, it learned to do a bunch of things that it didn't want to do. So now the fascinating thing about this is in adulthood, stepping into discomfort, into unfamiliarity, into the unknown, into the healthy tension that comes with setting healthy boundaries, individuating and differentiating, actually seeing yourself separate from the role that you learned to play in survival in childhood. Acknowledging your own existence separate from what everyone else taught you. You only exist if. Understand that. That's the thing about the survival-based childhood, is that it taught the child that it only exists if it does something specific. And it's usually a demand of the authoritarian, narcissistic parent. I know I say that I don't like labels, and I don't, but just for the sake of this, I'm going to utilize that. And so, no, they didn't get the space to develop as they were in childhood. They did not. That was not accepted. It wasn't. I mean, if they had, then they would have had a healthy childhood. No. They developed in the way, or the ways, that their parents or authority figures, whoever the hell raised them, developed them in survival. Now, the thing about adulthood is that people that are still participating in the same roles that the survival-based childhood taught them, the reality is you don't have to. I understand that people do it because it's comfortable and familiar. Maybe you are still people-pleasing. Maybe you are still... It really doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that either your boundaries are being violated or you're violating other people's boundaries. And that's what's comfortable and familiar for you. Stepping outside of that and getting into the healthy tension of saying no when you don't want to fucking do something, saying yes when you fucking do want to do something, recognizing that you might have relationships in your life that are based on your survival-based dynamics from childhood because it's comfortable and familiar. So because you brought your survival-based dynamic of a childhood into adulthood, you've attracted a bunch of people that are reinforcements of that survival-based childhood. You absolutely can continue to live in survival in adulthood. But the question is, and no judgment, no shame, no guilt, this is a safe space, why would you? It's entirely up to you. You can do whatever you want to, but why would you? Why would you continue to every single day wake up and do things that you don't want to do because you learned that that's what you had to do in order to survive, in order to exist? Yes, your survival and existence was based around you playing a role or multiple roles in a dysfunctional system that lacked healthy boundaries, individuation, and differentiation, all for the matter to be acknowledged, to be seen. You are relying on the external to be seen rather than determining that for yourself, rather than taking all of that power back on yourself and being like, you know what, I don't like any of this stuff. I don't. And I didn't for the longest time know why I was doing this, but now I realize that I've just brought my survival-based childhood dynamics into adulthood. And because I learned that I only existed and I could only survive if I played this specific role, that's just the same thing that I've been carrying out this entire time. That's all this is. Seeing it for what it is the most important thing. That's something that I mention a lot on this channel. See everything for what it is, because if you don't, you will be distracted by what it's not. You'll be confused by what it's not. If you don't see somebody's projection for what it is, a projection, them vomiting their insecurity on you because they lack healthy boundaries and they lack the desire to take their shit to a licensed professional who can actually help them through their stuff. No, they're just using you as a screen to projectile vomit their own shit, their insecurities onto. If you don't see it for what it is, you'll be distracted by, you'll be confused by what it's not. What it's not is having anything to do with you. Other people's projections have nothing to do with you. That's the reality of it. So, do you choose to continue living in survival in adulthood when you absolutely do not need to? It's entirely up to you. I understand that in survival-based childhoods, you learned to survive. You learned to survive by doing things that you didn't want to do. You learned that you only exist. When I say exist, what I'm referring to specifically is the love, the validation, approval, acceptance, the entire dynamic of a person recognizing themselves as real. Because the opposite of this can be very scary for a lot of people. Some people were so deprived of healthy mirroring, healthy acknowledgement, that their personality, their ego state developed in such a lacking manner that they deal with things that are very unfortunate to deal with. Not knowing who you are and wondering if you are even real or exist. I mean, it's just the reality of it. But you don't have to bring survival into adulthood. You don't have to bring a dynamic that's comfortable and familiar to childhood that is exceedingly unhealthy. And if you choose to stay there, will continue having you do things that you do not want to do. You deserve better. You deserve to live a life where you're free and you're doing things that you actually want to do, and you have absolutely no problem or anxiety sitting in whatever space you choose to say no in. That's the way it works.